had to rely on their feeling to see how warm something is. Now we can use thermometers